Hello, everybody. This is a live stream ponage that we're going to do of Ratz's video on foundationalism. Uh, it's a new video that he came up with that tries to prove the immateriality of the mind by recourse to epistemology. And joining me is Maximus Confesses.
Hey guys, what's up? We both found the argument to be lacking for various respects, and I think this is an argument that's terrible in terms of appeal if you're a dualist or a materialist. It's terrible in appeal if even if you are a foundationalist. It's terrible from all these perspectives. Even if you are Descartes himself, you would probably laugh at this because something everyone should know about the historical Descartes, and it's a fun historical fact. He wasn't a retard. So I'll explain that later on. Yeah, so I'll just begin playing it. Is that cool?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
The problem of consciousness has proven to be one of the most intractable problems in the history of philosophy. However, on close investigation, it appears that the answer to it may be deduced from the most elementary facts of basic epistemology. To see how this is realized, it is necessary
Sorry, just gotta lower the screen a bit.
to begin by investigating both the hard problem of
Wait,
consciousness
stop.
and the interaction problem.
What up?
Have you disliked it yet?
I have not disliked it, but it deserves a dislike.
Okay.
Oh, I have to sign in. Oh, well, I'll get around to it. You know what?
Okay, that's fine.
It's fine. We'll do that later. But everyone, don't forget the traditional dislike if anyone is interested. But anyway, going back.
The hard problem is the problem in materialism for how it is possible that a purely objective third-person material substrate such as the brain should cause or give rise to a purely subjective first-person material.
Stop. Stop.
Interaction.
Stop. Okay.
Stop.
Okay. Okay, so this is a sort of straw man argument that a lot of people don't get. So I'm just going to clear this up right now for anyone listening. The relation between qualia and its subjective and its objective substrate is not one of causation. It's not one of emergence, and it's not one of identity. The relationship is one of constitution, not causation. And so the example I give is that we should see qualia as events. So middle C, when middle C occurs, when the event of middle C occurs, what that means is that there is an audible vibration of pressure waves vibrating at a frequency of 262 hertz. Okay, through the air. That's what constitutes middle C. It doesn't just exist on its own. It's an event that is constituted of physical processes, in the same way that a marathon is an event that is constituted by physical processes, namely people running. If aliens came down and were to see I just got an email from my advisor saying
If they were to see a marathon, they wouldn't see, oh, hey, look, a bunch of humans having a race. They would say, oh, look, there are a bunch of humans running in one direction.
Yeah, they wouldn't see it as a marathon. So the marathon is something that we created because, I don't know if you know the story of the marathon, but it's a guy who ran to give a message, 26 miles to give a message to the Greek city of Marathon. Yeah.
I know my Greek history.
Yeah. So, yeah, but these are constructs. That's the idea. And a lot of these people assume that these ideas are universal. They're not, though, because not every city has a marathon. Or not every country has a city named Marathon. And if it wasn't for this event, there wouldn't be a marathon, most likely. So it's all contingent. It's not like this is intrinsically existing. Nothing.
So just to get this straight, middle C would not be some existing thing, or it would just be a representation. it would just be a linguistic representation created by the rules of a whole community.
Right.
Whenever certain material things emerge, and we use that to pick out middle C from other ranges of sound.
Yeah, but that's not universal. Like, they're different tonal music systems.
Because different languages pick out different tones.
Yeah, it's different societies. Yeah, I mean, music is something that humans constructed.
This is linguistic holism as opposed to some kind of atomism. Holism means the whole thing has to be made sense as a whole thing. You can't just take up a part of it and analyze it independently. However, someone who's more of an atomist would be like, oh yeah, all language is a series of propositions, and that leads up to the whole system. That's something thinkers like Russell and Whitehead did.
Yeah. All right, let's continue.
Is a problem in substance dualism for how it is possible for a substance with purely first-person subjective mental properties to cause effects in a substance with purely third-person material properties. If compared,
just so I could answer on behalf of the dualist, if you actually read the Meditations and the dialogue afterwards that Descartes has with Princess Elizabeth,
right, of Bohemia.
Bohemia, she was a royal who wanted to learn more. She read the Meditation. She found, she, amongst other thinkers, by the way, pointed out the interaction problem. It wasn't just her, but her letter is most prominent, at least in a university setting. Descartes' response was, look, my meditations are to show that there's interaction, not that I can figure it out. Interaction, be it physical, or immaterial, material, is always going to be a primitive notion. Granted, in physical objects, I will definitely say that my physics are only going to speak to interaction between physical things, and that's why things like extension, motion, and contact are required. But we don't know the primitive makeup of mind-body interaction. So Descartes was playing kind of a skeptic card. Now, there's no incoherency between the ideas. All Descartes was saying is that he didn't know, but it doesn't invalidate the theory. Elizabeth actually responded by pointing out that, isn't your whole, project to know things from certainty? And in which case, if you are trying to establish something from first principles, it doesn't seem like that kind of account would work. And while that is a fair point, I don't think the interaction problem is as intractable as critics make it out to be. There are plenty, like, I could give an answer. Maybe, like Malebranche, we could say God does it, like in an occasionalistic fashion, or wherein, or there's it's like a brute fact. There's always sets of laws which govern how psychophysical interaction takes place, as opposed to just purely physical interaction. If it all breaks down to there and God sets it up anyway, then on those problems it isn't intractable. Only if you're like going for a whole, I'm going to prove all facts, starting from only first principles, in which case I don't even think Descartes was attempting that. But anyway.
Yeah, and Descartes was working within his own frame of thinking, I guess. And philosophers do this a lot, where they have conversations with themselves within the same work. So Wittgenstein, in his philosophical investigations, has kind of like a dialogue with himself. It's kind of funny to read about going back and forth on positions. That's
true. And Descartes' whole, and well, I think we could just talk about Descartes a little more, and I think I will later in the video. It's poignant to find out that Descartes' methods were Descartes' methods. Not everyone is going to be a Cartesian epistemologist. There have been other schools of epistemology, and unless we're all Cartesian and you're just trying to convince us all, then I don't think this argument is going to be that strong.
both sides of the same underlying problem, an explanatory discontinuity between matter and mind. One of the problems we have in discussing consciousness scientifically is that consciousness is an irreducible subject.
Stop.
Many philosophers.
Yep.
Okay, yeah. Way to quote Sam Harris. I actually disagree with Sam Harris on this one.
But you can't disagree with Sam Harris. You're both materialists.
I know, it's weird.
It's weird.
But see, the thing is, there are two types of physicalists. There's reductive and there's non-reductive.
Mm-hmm.
There might be more actually, but I used to be an identity theorist of sorts before I discovered the sort of linguistic and conceptual aspect of this whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with reductive physicalism, let me just call it out because, you know, I think it's wrong, even though I'm a physicalist, is that you have to assume the intentional stance.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what this means is that whenever someone, a conscious or an adult being, let's say, is exposed to 260 vibrations of 261 hertz, we assume that that person must be experiencing, from a third person perspective, must be experiencing middle C. The problem is, middle C is an element of the Western tonal music system. It's not universal. So even talking about these qualia, you already have to dip your toe into a set of norms that are not universal. So it's kind of tricky to even, you know, the concept is really tricky because every time you talk about it, you're smuggling in a commitment to these norms. So talking about blue and green smuggles in a commitment to the Western norms. Talking about Zuzu, which smuggles in a commitment towards the Himba norms. Talking about all these elements of a particular system already smuggles in a commitment to these norms. But you can't look at it that way because you're supposed to be saying, people like Raatz and his ilk are supposed to be saying that these things exist. Well, they exist for certain people. That's the idea.
All right, let's keep it going.
Nope.
Consciousness, I agree with them on this point. That consciousness is what it's like to be. There's an experience.
Stop. Okay. So I highlighted this in my last video on consciousness, the fourth part of the series, where I, you know, wrap all this up and I go over Sellers's Karras lectures on the development of the given. And I think I'll just probably read from the script. If I can find it. Okay, here it is. Yeah, let me just read from the script because it just, I just put it into words and show why the whole thing just doesn't actually add up to any concept whatsoever. And part of it has to do with, you know, again, this issue of perspectival switching, where you're, you know, already privileging one set of norms or one particular mind over another in your conceptualization of a particular qualia or sense experience. And so that leads to a lot of philosophical problems. And the person who falls victim to this the most is, of course, the philosopher Thomas Nagel in his book or his essay on what it's like to be a bat. And here's what I write. The assumptions made by Chalmers's hard problem is that there is something intrinsic about experience. There isn't. In his essay, What It's Like to Be a Bat, the philosopher Thomas Nagel baptizes the experience of a bat which I mentioned at the beginning of this video, which is to say that he uses the human perspective to put the bat's perspective under analysis. The question of this paper only makes sense in light of Chalmers' assumptions about consciousness that he injects into his formulation of the hard problem. The problem with Chalmers and Nagel's understanding of consciousness is that they assume that experience can be captured or abstracted. Nagel baptizes the experience of a bat by trying to abstract it and understand it in his own terms. But Nagel isn't imagining what it's like to be a bat. He's imagining what it's like to have a bat's body, but with a human's brain, which is able to reflect on and conceptualize her experience of being a bat. Nagel is imagining a human-brained bat. More generally, when X tries to conceptualize what it's like to be Y, X is not conceptualizing what it's like to be Y. X is conceptualizing an X-brained Y. That is, a Y that has the brain of X, which allows it to conceptualize and reflect on the fact that it is a Y. However, an X-brained Y is not a Y. You can only experience something from your perspective. Trying to conceptualize any experience as an entity or an abstraction is misguided because experience is necessarily contextual to the experiencer. Chalmers's and Nagel's notions rely on an understanding of experience where experience or qualia is fundamentally decontextualized. Unquote.
So, yeah, I mean, I guess the whole point is one is begging the question when one is trying to conceptualize from the get-go what it's like to be a bat, since you're just putting your own experiences in a bat or whatever. And thus, you can't really get the whole analogy off the ground.
Right.
Right. All right. Can I continue playing?
Yeah.
Physical system, then that is consciousness. And we can't reduce the experiential side to talk of information processing.
No, I agree. I agree. Stop. Wait. I actually agree with that.
Mm-hmm.
I actually agree with that. You can't reduce it because it's not a thing that you can capture with physical descriptions. It's something that arises from a system of norms. So it's not just there on its own. So I agree. You can't reduce middle C to 262 hertz. You have to actually look at the system of norms that the people are using to categorize their experience in the first place. And then it only makes sense at that level of abstraction. It doesn't make sense at the physical level of abstraction.
So what you're saying is you actually have to have some kind of logic of norm and in order to, describe and program how languages work.
Yes. Yeah, but also how people organize their experience, because not everyone organizes their experience in the same way. And that's why you can't reduce it, because you're assuming that, if you, everyone sort of,
So is it like this? It would be like trying to capture what a bivalent logic system does using a trivalent, or by bivalent I mean something where a proposition could be either true or false, or a conclusion is true or false, whereas another logic might sort things out as true, false, or unknown, or fuzzy logics, which sort things out from 0 to 1.
Right.
In essence, every time you're trying to take one system of values and rules and put it in the language of another, you're going to be underdetermining it.
Yeah, but also what it leads to is the fact that the same stimulus, so the same 262 hertz, can be processed differently by different people depending on their psychological context. So it depends on the psychological context of the person doing the perceiver, because someone might call it middle C and someone might call it fluffle butter or something like that, or Kerna, some made up name, because these are all relative to their system of norms that they've ingrained in themselves. And that's why you can't reduce it.
I see.
Yeah.
All right, let's keep it going.
States of the brain in our case, because people want to do this. Someone like Francis Crick said famously, "You're nothing but a pack of neurons," and that misses the fact that half of the reality we're talking about is the qualitative, experiential side. So when you're trying to study human consciousness, looking at states of the brain, all you can do is correlate experiential changes with changes in brain states. But no matter how tight these correlations become, it never gives you license to throw out the first person experiential side. The analogous is flip the coin.
You want to stop or?
Yeah, it's not throwing it out. It's just that it's not throwing it out. It's just contextualizing it. You're not throwing it out. What you're trying to do is show that. So let me see if I can find it. But you're not. But there's this quote by Wittgenstein that says.
If you try to if you understood the words the lion was saying, you still wouldn't understand the lion because you wouldn't know what it was thinking. Like something like that.
That's no, I found it right here. It says the quote is that a wheel that can be turned though nothing else moves with it is not a part of the mechanism. I'll repeat that. A wheel that can be turned though nothing else moves with it is not a part of the mechanism. That's a very important quote. So it's not that you throw out the subjective experience side of it. What you're saying, this is kind of a straw man of eliminativism, which people say that they're trying to get rid of consciousness altogether. No, they're trying to eliminative materialists are trying to contextualize what you're calling experience to a particular set of norms, and what all these other people are doing are trying to decontextualize experience. And so that's the issue. We need a better way of actually examining this phenomenon that we call consciousness. It's not about throwing it all away. It's about just understanding it better. Continue.
Explanatory conclusion and premises.
Well, I mean, I can't speak to how you do it, but I would say on behalf of the dualist that the premises are, the premises would be, look, I'm a thinking thing. Thinking things are irreducible. But by essence, material things are non-reduced. Material things are always divisible. By essence, therefore they can't be identical. So you have, but I can still perceive them, which is a form of interaction. In terms of how they do it, one can say, because God guarantees my perception, and God is not a deceiver, then it follows that that His omnipotence and His whatever other quality and His omnibenevolence guarantee that I am actually seeing and interacting with the external world. So there you have it. You have two things interacting through the power and existence of God who is not deceiving you. Like there's the Cartesian method in a nutshell. And the premises are about the qualities of a material thing, God, whose omnipotence enables the creation, sustaining, and ordering of material things. So there we have it. You have immaterial premises which have immaterial ontologies and constituencies, and therefore you have an interaction with physical things. So, which the premises also not hard. You want to give an example of how a materialist would go about doing this?
Well, I would say that the connection between premises and conclusion is not. There's not a causal connection, because the connection is logical, not causal, and that's a huge. I think Drez made this sort of statement where he said that if physical things or mental things don't cause physical things, then there can't be a causal connection between the statements of premises and their conclusions, and therefore logic goes out the window. No, it doesn't, because the connection is a logical one, not a causal one, because premises don't have to cause conclusions, because people can still derive the wrong conclusions from a particular set of premises. Bad reasoning still exists, but the connection is logical. And so what makes it incorrect, logically speaking, is that, for example, a non sequitur is when there is no logical connection between the premises and the conclusion. But what we're talking about are logical, conceptual, abstract notions and statements and propositions. We're not talking about things causing one thing or another. So that's a total misunderstanding of the argument.
Right. So on one hand, he doesn't grasp the metaphysics the dualist would be imploring by invoking God and understanding the Cartesian method, and in another case, it would be not understanding that the logic is not related or correlated with any of the causal elements.
Right, and the premises are not causally related to the conclusions; they're logically related to the conclusions.
Exactly. Mm. So fancy logic aside, this isn't really going to do the trick. Oh, and I should probably add another rebuttal. You do not have to go from a foundationalist standpoint to getting to the conclusion. There are coherentist epistemologies. Foundationalism is actually a unique one pushed by Susan
Hack.
Yeah.
University of Miami. My dad works there.
Yeah, I've read her work, some of her work on pragmatism. I'm fairly impressed with it. But you could start off with the notion that the material world exists, and the mind exists, and that
I have to go to the bathroom real quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Continue.
I'll continue. So, Raatz is kind of presupposing that we could only begin with the premises that are foundational to our thinking, the ones we cannot live without. So, for example, if you go to Descartes, he writes about the meditations by creating a foundation for knowledge grounded in certainty. Now, when he does this, he goes on to things which he couldn't be wrong even in the most delirious cases, such as an evil demon. And the two things he realizes is, look, I know I exist because even for something to deceive me, it presupposes that there is someone being deceived. And two, I might be experiencing green things, but even if there isn't a green thing that it's correlated to, it's just a dream or a deception, I'm at least experiencing what seems green. Because seeming is something which is part and parcel with being deceived. You require things that seem like other things. And then he goes on to the ontological argument, and then he grabs God's existence, and then he reasons through God that, since God isn't actively allowing deception, as opposed to maybe allowing it in certain cases, then, bam, we have a reason to trust our senses. However, a lot of epistemologists don't go through that. You could disagree with Descartes' process. You could say it's not sound, although I wouldn't say it's not valid. But a good camp of them, like W.V.O. Quine, are coherentists. They believe that knowledge is like a web. There are things which are more central than others. But what happens is when we take on new beliefs, what we do is we look at how well they cohere to our background beliefs. And if they do, and they could stand up to how we acquire information, how we make our way through the world, we incorporate them. Sometimes we have to get rid of stuff that is central. Sometimes we get rid of stuff on the outer web. But in any case, it's about keeping us afloat and keeping the web strong in general. It might be the case that materialism is something we need to believe because of all our other background beliefs, our trust and dependency of the physical sciences, perhaps, and just getting rid of and the fact that because dualistic conceptions don't work and they add a new level, we should shy away from them and instead focus on more naturalistic means. But in any case, if you are a coherentist, this is not the argument that will work for you. Heck, and even if you are a foundationalist and what's called an externalist, it's not going to work for you. An externalist is someone who believes that knowledge is the case because of a relationship you bear with the world around you. So, for example, if someone was to ask me why I believed that I'm seeing a book right now, I would say, well, it's because my senses, which are provide me reliable belief forming tool, and process, point this out to me, and I am rational and trustworthy. Likewise, I could say the same thing about myself existing and myself being a mind, and not needing to go to first principles in order to reason myself to this conclusion. Whereas they have internals, he thinks knowledge is when your beliefs meet a certain set of criteria. It's not about their relationship. But anyway, our host is back.
All right.
Any given argument will have a set of premises which proceed to some conclusion. To do this, it will go through a series of steps manipulating the terms in the premises through use of logical rules until the conclusion is arrived at by the manipulation of these terms. As such, only terms in the premises are allowed to show up in the conclusion. Likewise, if terms appear in the conclusion, then it follows that they must also be present in the premises. If they do not, then the terms in the conclusion that do not appear in the premises must have appeared somewhere in between for no logical reason.
Wait, stop.
I did.
Okay.
I stopped when you told me to stop, and then you kept going. I was like, "Oh, stop!" I'm sorry.
Yeah. Okay. Now this is a really, really slippery road that we're about to go down. Because he wants to say, first of all, this only works in a perfect axiomatic system like mathematics. The argument that this is a proof. This is not an argument.
Exactly. This is like the bare bones structure.
Yeah.
Right. And here's the thing: we're both actually saying that the conclusion is contained within the terms. You're saying that you could get subjective experiences by way of analyzing the norms of the human system and the way it constructs things, whereas I'm saying that you could actually get to the interaction of a material world through trust and dependency of the power of God, which is how Descartes does it. So our conclusion is contained within the premises.
Yeah, but this is not. So he doesn't understand the difference between a proof and an argument. Mm-hmm. Like this is not how if all arguments were like this, debates would be over in literally 30 seconds. You have to present a case. So even here, this is not this is not a deductive system. I'm not proving math. I'm not modus ponens. Where is this coming from? I mean, this is not. So anyway, he's saying that the premises have to be contained in the conclusion. Well, I don't. Or sorry, in the conclusion has to be contained in the premises, but I don't think that it's a conclusion though. I like my position is that I don't think middle C is a conclusion that's contained within the physical substrate of this 262 hertz vibrations. I think that middle C is just what someone decided, what a society constructed in a way to organize perceptions, to find a system of organizing sensory perceptions. And it's I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah, it's not something that just it's not true. So we're going to get to this issue of truth later in the video, but it's not true. Middle C is not the conclusion, because middle C doesn't have to necessarily be the only conclusion, because you're implying that the Western system of norms is the only conclusion to environmental stimuli. It's not. That is the fallacy. So yeah.
Right. Middle C is just the representation of certain brain activity contained within a specific geographic region. Middle C would be contained to North America and
Western Europe, yeah.
Exactly. I think, and you have a good point in terms of pointing out that he's just using deductive reasoning. Deductive in the sense of drawing conclusions where the terms are contained in the premises. You could actually reason, and I'm betting you do reason yourself to this, to your model of how the brain works inductively or abductively.
Abductively, yeah. So he brought up, I asked a couple people, some questions that they would like to be addressed in the final video, and I didn't list any of his questions because they were all stupid, but one of the things he asked me was about the problem of induction, which is, because I'm using science in my arguments, but the thing is, science doesn't necessarily always have to rely on induction. And in the case of, how we conclude the existence of environmental stimuli, that's pure abduction, because we're making inference to the best explanation. We look at the fact that there are butterflies and bees that are responding to things that we aren't, and we say, hey, what is this? And we conclude that there are sensory phenomena that we cannot see, and that's how you make the conclusion. So yeah.
All right, let's keep it going.
Over such a leap in logic is what is termed a non sequitur fallacy. When we apply this principle of explanatory continuity to problems in philosophy of mind, we see that any potential solution to either the heart problem or the interaction problem is doomed from the start. In the case of the heart problem, any potential solution will supremacies containing terms for purely material contents without method terms, and conclusion containing method terms.
Okay, stop. Okay, so could you rewind it to that last part?
Sure. Is it this part?
Yeah, because this is sort of my turf. I reject mental causation, and the perfect analogy, and this is, I can't take credit for this. This is Marianne Talbot and Oxford, is that of a vending machine. Is it the quarter that is it the quarterness of the quarter that causes the drink to dispense? No, it's the material properties that we have that reflect what it means for something to be a genuine quarter that cause the machine to dispense. So it's about how it disrupts the magnetic fields in the coin slot, and how it disrupts the ray of light that passes through it when it rolls down into the bin, and then it triggers, it signals how much money is in the bin, and when there's sufficient money, it's able to retrieve the drink that you want. But it's not the quarterness it's not the quarter itself that's pulling the strings. It's just the physical properties. And same thing with when you're at a traffic light. When you stop at a green light, or sorry, stop at a red light, it's not the redness of the light that caused you to put your foot on the brake. Because again, back to norms, we live in a society where red means stop. It could have been the other way. So it's not, again, the qualia is never pulling the strings in any situation. It's always about the context.
Right. So here's actually a good illustration of something similar. If I was to reason like this, either the sky is blue or water is dry. The sky is blue, therefore water is not dry. Now, if you were unacquainted with logic, that would seem very bizarre. Like,
Yeah.
like how's that possible? Like, you're being nonsensical. Those things don't connect well. People usually think of or as in either exclusively, like in you could have this or that, but not both. But they fail to think, yeah, sometimes it could be inclusive. You could have either this or that, or you could have both of them. It could be either one. So that is usually because that's usually never stated. We usually just intuit it from context. Or just to use this example, in this case, the contents of those premises doesn't matter. It's just the operation of the rules that are in place. That's why I conclude it's valid. I'm not saying anything about the soundness of the arguments. But in either case, if you're in a logic class, that's not at all bizarre, unless it's the first or couple of classes. But if you're doing things in the real world, then people are like, ew, what the heck is this? So likewise, when you're doing specific languages like that, especially this context, if you're doing logic with people who understand how the logic works, then everyone's understanding of it. No one treats it as bizarre because you're picking up the same things everyone is valuing. But if you were to do it in the real world where people aren't acquainted with formal logic, then people are like, what the hell is going on here? It's always the power that's given to the representation, or the value that's given to the representation that's doing the work. It's context dependent.
Yeah, it's never acting on its own. It's just what it's been conditioned to mean. So, Drezd asked me, I think he deleted his Facebook, but he asked me, why is it that why is it that green causes his foot to, or why is it that red causes his foot to stop at a stoplight? Well, is it the red that's causing it? Because first of all, people run red lights, so there's that. But also, I mean, he doesn't take a step back and look at the norms at work in the society in which he lives that cause that to happen, that make it such that happens. What is it about red? So it's the qualia never acts on its own. It's just a function of the context of what a particular qualia does. But you haven't gotten out of the brain and whatever. So yeah, the next slide is probably going to be your area.
Right, but just to add to that, in terms of conditioning, anyone who's interested in this kind of thing could look at behavioral psychology. An illustration from history is Pavlov's dog.
Yeah.
Pavlov drools with the bell because he's associating it with the value of steak or his food. Just to use a cornerstone, but yeah, on to the next one. Yeah, that term is contained within God's power. Like that's how it's understood. If God is omnipotent, then of course that would include creating material things, objects, creating immaterial things and objects, and creating a system of laws wherein one group affects the other group. Like it's contained within that theological understanding. So it only would bear a problem, I think, for the dualist who isn't a theist, and those are very few and far between.
As such, both materialism and dualism must be overcome as logically possible. But if this is the case, how can we use explanatory principle to solve the problem of consciousness? The answer is simply that terms of the first principles I was made about. Once we have established that in terms of the conclusion must have the same ontology as the terms of the first principles, the question then becomes to logically start with general premises or mental premises. For this, all we need to do is turn to foundationalist epistemology and determine what the ultimate first principles of any explanation necessarily mean. We do this by defining all that can be logically doubted, except what cannot be logically doubted as foundational.
Stop.
You say stop?
Yep.
Yeah, there. I'll just say it first. There aren't a lot of Cartesian epistemologists anymore. There are some. In fact, my epistemology book, the one I read for my epistemology class, was actually written by a Cartesian. I actually found his arguments and his position to be very well defended, and I'm kind of leaning in that direction myself. But at most, this argumentation and method is only going to appeal to a minority of people. And epistemologists. You still have coherentists and other such people who aren't going to be on board with the projects.
Well, also, I would say that the foundationalism assumes that you're born with these norms. This was Sellers's main, one of Sellers's main problems with foundationalism is that what it presumes is that you just come out just conceptualizing. You just exit the womb and you're just conceptualizing and you're just not taught anything. And that's not the case. You have to be acculturated into these systems. So in regards to something like any mental state really, but the reason I use sound, specifically middle C, is because it really drives the point home. People think red as given to them, but our ability to apperceive, to reflect on consciously our own mental states and to examine them analytically, to put them under some sort of psychological analysis, is derivative. It's derived from a pattern of linguistic activity that's intrinsically social. So it's necessarily a public pattern of linguistic activity. This gets to Wittgenstein's private language argument that Raatz rejects, which I don't see we are taught these norms. We are taught about middle C. We are taught about music, and that's how it works.
Yeah, I think for someone like Descartes or someone who's kind of in the middle between the empiricist camp and the rationalist camp, Immanuel Kant, they would think that we have just innate ideas within our mind, ones that have to, of course, be brought out socially speaking by other people, so we could properly exercise it, because otherwise you'd probably just end up like a feral child raised by wolves or animals, not being able to cognize things. But other than that, we'd have to also take into account some kind of heavy metaphysic, which the naturalist wouldn't be sold on anyway. That you would have to give other reasons for that. You can't just start off by saying, "Look, we have all these metaphysics. Look, we are just starting off blank slate." No, you're bringing in some metaphysical assumptions here that have to be argued for as well. Right. So, anyway.
These statements are statements about other things. Cartesian ego, I, is a mind. Forms or ideas are mental objects contained within the mind, and sensory data or perceptions are intrinsically subject to first-person mental impressions. The material world, however, lies on the other side of the sensory mind, not referred to as phenomena. Given that it can be doubted, statements about the outside world cannot be used as first principles in any ultimate explanation.
Stop.
Thus, the first...
That's why you have. that if anyone's read the Meditations, Descartes gives two arguments for God's existence just from a priori principles, and from there you can trust in the existence of the external world. Like there, that's all you need. So I'm not sure why the external world wouldn't exist just because you would doubt it. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, see, the thing is, what do you mean doubt? Because would that mean to be unaware of? In other words, Wittgenstein makes this argument that we could not possibly. It makes no sense to say we know something in a situation where we could not possibly doubt it. So therefore, to say I know that I'm in pain is totally senseless. And what he says, the point he's making is that if you're going to say that it's true, that it is true that you're experiencing this qualia, or it's true that this qualia exists, then you have to, there has to be a truth maker for that statement. And there also has to be a false maker. So what Raatz says is that he impresses it, I forgot the exact wording, but basically what he says is he rigidly designates red to mean something, and he rigidly designates green to mean something. And I asked him, in virtue of what are these designations true? Or in virtue of what is something green? And he says, in virtue of the fact that I rigidly designated it for it to be green. But then the question arises, if you had rigidly designated otherwise, would that statement also be true? In other words, under what circumstances could this be false? And the point is that if you can't possibly doubt it, and there is no false maker to the statement, then it's not really true in any real sense. It's just what you've decided to call it. And, the labels are arbitrary.
I mean, I wouldn't exactly go about putting it in terms of rigid designators. There are some internalists like, what's his name? Michael Huemer. He usually goes about it by, he would respond to Wittgenstein by saying, I wouldn't say I can't doubt that I am feeling pain, but what I would say is I am feeling what it seems that I'm feeling pain. He would just put it in seemings. Like, and you could put this in just regular examples. Like, have you ever seen this image where there's two lines? On the one line, you have two arrows pointing outward, and on the other line, you have two arrows, but instead of the arrows pointing outwards, they're pointing in the other direction. And if you were to ask someone which line looks longer, the one in the middle, they would probably say, oh, the one where they're pointed outwards. Well, no, they're actually the same size. It only seems like that. So when someone says seemings, so I would say, so he would probably say to Wittgenstein, look, you're right. It could be the case that pain is this, other this out there thing, or it could be just something else entirely, or it could be as you described it, Polly. But at the same time, my mind has this tendency to treat it like this. By this tendency, I mean it's like this. So one could phrase it like that. So one doesn't need to give it a rigid designation. But at that point, I don't think the argument would do what Raatz would want. Because he'd want to say that these things are indubitable and unquestionable. Whereas this would say, no, they're questionable, but we should probably give this prima facie justification and then turn it over. And then if there's further evidence to the contrary, we can turn it over.
Right.
Okay. Principles behind any ultimate explanation are necessarily statements about mental items, as that is all one is able to refer to prior to solving the problem of external world skepticism. And of course, first principles are the foundation of any ultimate explanation. Thus, there not is true knowledge. Ultimately, and justified by first-person basis. At this point, we can formulate an argument using nothing more than foundationalist epistemology, of logic, and the principle of sufficient reason.
Just to point out something, justified true belief is, by the accounts of most epistemologists, just rejected these days.
Yeah.
Even Plato, even when Plato's original dialogue, when he brought it up, he had Socrates reject the concept.
Oh.
And, here's a good reason why justified true belief doesn't work. Let's say you're sitting down and you look to see the time, and it's 12 o'clock on your watch.
Right.
Right. And
I've heard this.
Right, and it's actually 12 o'clock. But it just so happens that your watch stopped, and you were just lucky enough to have it at the right time. So you have a belief that it's 12 o'clock. It's justified because you saw it on your watch, and it's true. It is actually 12 o'clock. But it would seem it's only true by way of luck. So I don't know why he's bringing this into account. Yeah,
but also it's because it may be the case that knowledge, Matt Dillahunty said this in a debate with Seitan Bruggencate, it may be the case that knowledge, especially regarding synthetic propositions, if you accept that analytic synthetic distinction, it might be a just totally useless label. What we have are just beliefs that are justified and beliefs that aren't justified by the evidence, and then we can make approximations as to how true they are. But no theory is perfect, and that's the issue. So science doesn't deal with true and false. It just deals with models that are accurate. And the example that I give is the meteorologist never gets the weather exactly perfectly right, but it's good enough to know what to wear. So
that's a good way to look at it. It's kind of like not the point of science is giving an empirical model that best captures the phenomenon.
Right.
Right.
Wait, stop. I take issue with premise one. Yeah, the terms and conclusions must be found in their premises. The terms and conclusion must be found in their premises.
I agree. That only applies to deduction.
Yeah, this is not necessarily, this is more abduction, and if anything, this is an argument. This is not a proof. Again, so, and I would say that red is not a conclusion. There is no conclusion to how your mind processes 633 nanometers of light, wavelengths of electromagnetic radiation. There's no red is not the conclusion of that. Okay, so again, signification is not even the conclusion of that. Your mind doesn't have to signify that. So even that is fluff. Okay,
keep on going, but I'm just going to excuse myself to get a charger for the laptop.
All right. So red is not, what Raatz doesn't understand is that these are not conclusions, because conclusions, I agree that conclusions logically follow from premises, but the fact is that for any physical phenomenon, there is no mental conclusion that follows from it. There is no qualia conclusion that follows from it. What you have to do is examine the norms of the society and how they function in relation to its environment and how that will express itself. But there is no conclusion as to how 261 hertz is processed by the mind. Some people might call it middle C. Some people might not even signify it because they don't have that in their tonal music system. So, this argument that, what he's trying to say is that it necessarily follows that middle C, the musical tone middle C, will come from 261 hertz of vibration. That's not true. And he hasn't provided any argument for that. So, This guy is just thinking he's not even his thinking assumes that qualia again is given in a way that cannot it could in such a way that it couldn't even happen otherwise. It couldn't be otherwise, but clearly it can be otherwise because there are different systems at work. So. Stop. Sorry. Yeah, mental ontology is a nonsensical phrase. I don't see how something can have I don't know what of anything that has mental ontology. First principle. Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't say it's nonsensical. It might be unexemplified. There might. I'm sorry, you were saying?
Yeah. Mental ontology is not a thing. These are acculturated things. So red, you don't refer to red. Like even if you say red has mental ontology, you are acculturated into that system. Even if you say middle C has mental ontology, you are acculturated into a system of norms that contains middle C as one of its elements.
And I wouldn't say it's nonsensical myself. I think that there are things with mental ontologies, but I think that's more of a metaphysical disagreement myself. But let's get back to the video.
Premise 3. Everything must have explanations that logically follow from first principles. Conclusion 2. Everything must have mental ontology.
Okay, why premise 3? I mean, why is it so incumbent that we have a Cartesian epistemology? I lean to that direction, but if I was to discover it was untenable tomorrow, I wouldn't think, well, time to stay in bed because knowledge isn't a thing anymore.
Well, I mean, I actually reject the Cartesian picture, and I think that Descartes is actually to blame for a lot of the assumptions that go into conversations about consciousness, namely because Sellers actually flips Descartes on his head and says, hey, well, actually, introspection is derivative from extrospection. And there's I'll show you the video I posted. It's on my channel, but it shows the inconsistent triad of premises generated by philosophical empiricism. And one of the, I won't go through all of them now, but one of the conclusions of that is that our ability to sense middle C and signify it as such, sense middle C as middle C is innate. So in other words, we are born with these norms. So it's not even an acquired taste or an acquired way of thinking. It's just, oh yeah, we came into the world with these norms about middle C. So yeah, norms about music. Yeah, so keep going. What is true knowledge? Stop. What is true knowledge?
Well,
what?
It's the opposite of false knowledge.
Well, but in what case could this is the problem? What do you mean by true knowledge? Because on his metaphysical view, nothing is true. Things just are. So it's not true. Like the problem is he's using this word in a dishonest way, and he's not specifying it because it's not true in any real sense. It's true in the fact that he labeled it. So he just called it something, and then that becomes true, but it's not true of the thing itself. And so it couldn't be false either. So if it's something, how can something be true when there are no circumstances under which it could be false?
Well, I mean,
what like does that? Do you understand? Like, if there's not a false maker, if there is not in principle a false maker, of a particular, like you have truth makers, but you have a false maker. If there is not in principle a false maker of a certain proposition, then in what sense is it true? It's not even a tautology, like the laws of logic, of Aristotelian logic. I mean, we're talking about something that in principle could not be false. Like
Right. I mean, I think one could argue that colors could. So there is an argument about synthetic a prioris. Like,
yeah.
right. So I've given you this example before. One could imagine, if I was to say that no object can have a surface area. So no three-dimensional ball, or all balls are three-dimensional. No ball can have its surface area be all green and all non-green. That would be truth that would be an analytical truth, because green and non-green are really do reflect opposites. Because however, that statement would be false, because that ball is actually green and non-green all over. By non-green, it just means everything which isn't green, but surface areas and balls are non-green. So they would fall under that camp as well. But of course, the ball is that all over. It's also material all over, and it's green all over the surface area. But if I was to say no ball is green and red all over, that would be truth, and it seems like a synthetic truth at that. Mostly because, one couldn't intuit that. Green and red seem to take on different connotations. It's not just a matter of definition. Now, I know me and you would disagree on whether or not there could be truths about green or red to begin with. But if one is to accept that there are truths about color, one would have to accept that a synthetic a priori could exist in this way. Other examples are, there are other examples of things like something which is analytical, and a posteriori. So think of the identity between water and H2O. I think you would agree. I think you and I agreed that water is H2O in all possible worlds. So maybe these would suffice as examples. Maybe to break the analytical synthetic distinction.
Right.
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 Given how directly this flows from epistemology, one finds that it is logically impossible to refute. Any attempt to do so will automatically fall into one of two logical fallacies. If one rejects the first premise, one ultimately has one's arguments grounded in concrete assertions, but to do so is to commit their assertion fallacy. This even holds if one is open to unproven premises for pragmatic reasons, such as the unproven belief in the materiality of the outside world. If, however, rejects the second premise, it would automatically miss the first.
Oh, wait, actually, that's pretty cool.
What?
Oh, I actually got to full screen. But anyway, yeah, just to excuse all by just saying, oh, if you're starting off with bare assertions, then you're just anti-logic. That's not true. So properly basic beliefs would be examples of beliefs everybody has to start off with. These would be beliefs. These would be beliefs such that if you were to reject them, you couldn't function as a normal human being. Like the classical laws of logic, the rules of causality, the existence of the external world, the fact that solipsism doesn't exist. These would also have to be propositions which you couldn't prove in a non-circular fashion. Like what appeal can you make to somebody who rejects logic, that logic is worth keeping around? It's like, I mean, even Johann Raatz can get to a point where he has to start making bare assertions.
Well, that's the irony. Because if I ask him what makes it red, well, he just says, well, I'd rigidly designate it for it to be red. But in what sense is it true? Like, in other words, you can't get out of this. It's a circle of sorts, but it's a circle where he tries to create an ostensive definition in his head. The circularity, it's circularity, it's arbitrary, it's Munchausen's trilemma all in one. You have the circularity, which is just I say it's red because I say it's red because I say it's red. You have the arbitrarity of the bare assertion, which is it's just red. Well, why red as opposed to green or some made up word like kerma? And then you have the regress, which is that it's you can't you keep going back to I say it's red because it's red, but why that? But why red? Well, because I say it's red, but why do you say it's red? And so it's just this infinite regress. So it doesn't. His entire argument is just falls victim to the whole trilemma.
We all have to start off with premises, and the fact of the matter is, when we start off with premises, we're usually going to want to start off with the premises we find to be most dependable. Like the reason I'm attracted to the Cartesian. One of the reasons I have been attracted to the Cartesian epistemological method, personally, is that Descartes actually tries to show that, hey, these are the beliefs that we would be the least in doubt of given the most extraordinary circumstances. Now, while other people might not find that, too appealing, they might say, well, I mean, that best or just you might be appealing to intuitions, Descartes. Some people, like Quine, might find the best recourse in science because look at all the great shit science has done for us. Like those would be the premises we really should start off with. At the end of the day, we all have to start off with the premises where we find to be most reliable. And if anyone questions you on that, well, you're just making bare assertions. Well, even the skeptic has to make some bare assertions. Saint Augustine of Hippo, when he was questioned by the academic skeptics, responded by saying, look, if you say I have to go to bare assertions or an infinite regress to justify that I cannot have knowledge, then why are you guys exempt from saying that entails I cannot have knowledge? Why does that have to entail I can't have knowledge? And if for that reason, why does that have to follow? And from that reason, why, so on and so on and so forth. Even the skeptic has to start off with some premise. And the fact of the matter is, the premise we start off with is the one we should find to be the most reliable and the most helpful for coming up with a strong worldview and viewpoints. So let's keep it going. Is it just me, or does he seem to have a boner for the Matrix?
Yeah, he does.
I don't
know.
That movie is so overrated.
I like that movie.
Sorry. It's just one of those popular movies that a lot of people like, but I just don't. But anyway, why do the machines have to keep the robots alive? Sorry, why do the machines have to keep the human beings alive to power them? Because generally human beings themselves have to be kept alive, and that itself takes a sufficient amount of resources and energy. So the movie's kind of botched that up. The book it's based off of actually answered that by saying humans have imagination, which the machines require, but anyway. It's also kind of dickish just to say the transcendental idealists are morons. I mean, that's actually a pretty decent philosophical camp.
It does not logically relate to, well, I agree with that, but why should it? So, why should 262 hertz of vibration relate to middle C? There is no logical relation, but you're the one who's saying that that has to be the conclusion. It doesn't have to be, because again, it depends on what norms are at work. We didn't have, it could have been another way, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So middle C isn't the conclusion to a physical phenomenon, because that implies that it couldn't have been another way. No, it could have been another way. It's just an accident that we happen to call it middle C and have these system as norms.
Somebody commented on Messenger and asked me, I wonder what Raatz thinks about the Matrix being written by 2 trans women.
I thought it was one trans woman.
No, now they're both trans women.
Oh.
Yeah, I know, right?
I know Larry became Lana, but Andy...
Just look it up. They're both trans now.
Lana and Lily.
Yep.
Andrew, wow.
We learned something today.
Wachowski brothers.
Wachowski sisters, apparently.
Yeah. Okay, interesting.
Okay, let's keep it going.
Perhaps this will reveal it's well open to be studied by science. Exists so as to be logically relatable to our senses. The world consists of conscious so what you're seeing is not space-time or physical stuff. It's other
Can I just say, stop, fuck this guy? I despise Stuart Hoffman.
What is this guy's thing?
He is a dumbass and an idealist person, and I saw he had a conversation with Daniel Dennett and David Chalmers about consciousness, and I felt bad for Dennett because he was just dealing with the biggest buffoons ever.
You think David Chalmers is a buffoon?
I fucking hate David Chalmers. He's just he is the one who's responsible for all of this crap about consciousness.
Him and his property dualism.
I reject. Yeah, property dualism is bullshit, but it's just the whole conceptualization is, and Gilbert Ryle attacks a lot of this as well, saying that he's not actually that a lot of these concepts about consciousness that we have come from misunderstandings and Cartesian notions that need to be abandoned, but it's just this baggage. It's just this baggage and not actually turning the thing around, turning the problem on its head or something.
Interface is just presenting you that interaction. It's supposed to be as a space-time desktop. In other words, for science to be possible, idealism must be true.
Alright, that's it. I should probably sign in and just give this thing a dislike.
On a scale of 1 to 10.
What would I give the video?
Yeah.
3.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking too. 3.
Oh, by the way, I should actually point out one of the comments here. It's kind of interesting, but apparently, according to one commentator, even IP rejected this the argument in this video.
Yeah, well, you saw my video refuting IP on quantum mechanics and the Trinity.
Oh, and here it is.
Okay.
Downvote. Okay, man. That is one of my least favorite videos of IP. Like, hey guys, God is a trinity because he exists in hyperdimensions. I'm like, God doesn't exist in extended space, you idiots.
Oh no, the Trinity was about they're two different things. The quantum mechanics is a separate video.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Oh. I see.
Wait, let me read the comments on this. Realistic nihilist. And what are the inference rules? Can we put in print? I'm not a foundationalist. In fact, I'm listening to a talk right now. I'm like 2/3 of the way done with it on the justification for knowledge on Sellers' view that doesn't, such that you don't have to take the foundationalist position.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, my problem with coherentism is just generally it dissolves into circularity. Like, and I know that according to them, some circles can be okay and argued thusly, but it's really hard for me to buy.
Oh, look at that. I wonder how many materialists will attempt to refute this video but fail miserably. Well,
I'm not even a materialist, and I think this is a shit video.
Yeah. It just relies on. See, the thing about Raatz, though, is that he doesn't. When you're actually talking to him in PM, you can tell that he's just pulling the stuff out of his ass. Like when he tags me in posts that he makes, like I just thought about this new argument. He's not actually reading anything that's mainstream. I mean, he's not actually thinking about this stuff. What he's just doing is coming up with things on the spot in a very sort of echo chamber-like way.
Joshua Holloway says, "I haven't had my mind blown this severely since I discovered the introspective argument." Wow. I mean,
that was the first video I refuted when I started YouTube. When I started like making videos actively, and that was 3 years ago in 2014.
How time flies.
Yeah. Wow.
Actually, somebody made a good point. Conclusions of fallacious arguments like non sequiturs can actually still be true. Like that.
Can they if they don't follow?
Even if, well, yeah, it's called the fallacy. So, for example, let's say if the only arguments let's say all scientific arguments affirm the consequence, it doesn't entail that science is false or our scientific models are false. It would only entail that we couldn't come to believe it through a lot of our systems of logic.
Oh.
But so let's see if there's any more. This is the one. Hey Raatz, I showed IP this video, and he has this objection. He said, quote, "Just because Raatz and I are on the same team, that doesn't mean I just back him up on everything. If he makes an error, he makes an error. Premise 2 just doesn't make any sense. First principles are just propositions. They do not claim to be mental substances."
Exactly.
Yep. And that is not inherent in the first principles. They are merely epistemic claims, not ontological claims.
Thank you.
It is ironic he is talking about non sequiturs because that's what this video does.
That is beautiful. I mean, he's just doing our work for him. I mean, we just explained that, but that's really succinct. Yeah. And he just doesn't understand what he's talking about. And he's so low, it's such low-hanging fruit, but it's what happens when you don't actually understand what you're talking about. You just make arguments up on the spot. And, he just categorically rejects the notion that, he rejects the possibility that he could be wrong, but the kicker for me, for qualia, is just this notion of qualia inversion. Because there's no fact of the matter as to what it is, and you're privileging your norms over another system of norms. And
let's hear his response. But they are epistemic claims about ontic things. Also, the idea with first principles is that they are known a priori, whereas other statements require further proof.
But middle C is not known a priori. That's the problem. You're treating qualia as qualia are not a priori. You're acculturated into them, which is the point. Middle C is not a priori.
Yeah, I mean, at best you could say there are things which seem like middle C, but that's about it.
This doesn't even get into the level of, I mean, we don't have to, but we didn't even discuss givenness when we're talking about like deconstructing experience itself and the different levels at which you can experience something, and how you're always injecting your conceptions of one particular quale when you talk about it. So you're assuming that there's one degree of absolute givenness to a particular percept. It's ridiculous. And so that's why it doesn't make any sense to talk about blue in a vacuum, because it doesn't exist on its own. It's just a product of the mind that's looking at it. So if you were a 4-year-old, you wouldn't hear middle C the same way that you do. So what does middle C sound like? What does blue look like? They don't look like anything on their own. I mean, the whole point of qualia is that it's subjective, and if it's subjective, then it's subjective to whatever mind is looking at it. So there's nothing intrinsic about the sound of middle C, because middle C doesn't sound like anything. The sound it comes from you. It's not coming from the middle C, the qualia itself. Like you're the one it's coming from you. It's not being impressed onto you. You're the one putting stuff into it.
So I think the two ways you could go about this is your way, which is it gets its content and its external meaning from the world itself and from conditions and pressures within it. Or you could go, the dualistic way, which is to say, you start off in a very solipsistic way where it's you giving the seemings and the definitions and the ideas, and it's really only you who's understanding them, and attributing them to various stimuli and associations. And the only reason we kind of induce a language is because God is non-deceptive. He's creating a world where your functions are reliable to understand that people are giving things given similar context as you, the same kind of understanding. Like, I think those are the two paths the materialist and the dualist can go, and they both seem fine to me.
Do you want to? Okay. Well, I think. Let me just end the hangout now. That's fine. Sure. All right. Hope you guys enjoyed this. Stay tuned for more videos. I might do one on Trump probably later today or tomorrow. I already have the audio recorded, and so I might put that up. Anyway, thank you for watching, and goodbye.